John Michaelman. I hereby call to order the Thursday, August 27th meeting, public meeting of the City of Prescott Planning Commission. Before we start, if you would check your cell phones to make sure they're on mute, would appreciate that. Have the commission members introduce themselves, and we'll start off on my right with Stan.
Good morning, Stan Galagoski.
Greg Lozelle.
Good morning, Tom Hutchison.
Ted Gambogi.
Butch Tracy.
George Lee.
Okay. I believe we have from the City Council, Steve Siska, Phil Good, and Kathy Rusing. Did I miss anybody? With all the masks out there, it's kind of hard to tell who's who on that. So, okay. City staff will introduce themselves when they speak on that part. This is an open public meeting and is being taped, recorded, and videotaped by the city. The proceedings are being televised by representatives of the public, media. The public, local cable and/or radio stations may also rebroadcast. The number of commissioners present is 7. It will require 4 votes for majority. Some of the individuals may be attending the meeting remotely. All parties wishing to be heard, including commission, to state their name prior to speaking in order to ensure accurate minutes. Members of the public, when called upon, are required to state their name and address for the record so we may know who is speaking and be able to contact them at a later date if need be. First item on the agenda is the approval of the August 13th, 2020 meeting minutes. Are there any corrections? If not, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Commissioner, I move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign? Okay. Why don't we start off, our next thing would be AED South Annexation, ANX 18-005, Master Plan MPA 18-003, and Rezoning Plan PLN 18-009 for properties generally located east of State Route 89, south and west of the Granite Dell Estates, and northeast of Watson Lake. I don't think I'll read through all the parcel numbers here. If anybody wants to have them, we'll provide them there. Brent, do you want to start off first?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Bryn Stotler, Director of Community Development. Thank you all for being here this morning. This is a much anticipated meeting. We've been working on this annexation application, both of them, for quite some time, and we're excited today to be presenting an overview and then specifically take a deeper dive into the South Annexation proposal. The North Annexation is also on the agenda. It can be referred to, can be spoken about, can be commented on by the public if they wish, but we do anticipate today's focus to be the South Annexation. It's not moving it.
Tom Hutchison here. Is this the first time this has been in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission?
There was an introduction years ago to the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it is the first time since these active applications have been filed, yes, that this has come before the Commission.
Thank you.
So wanted to just recap the agenda for those in attendance. And by the way, thank you to those members of the public who have shown up today in person. We're happy to have our council chambers open again post all of the COVID restrictions. So it's kind of exciting to see people's faces in person. We're also very happy to be able to offer the opportunity for those who can't be here or would rather not come into City Hall right now to participate via Zoom. So you'll see what that looks like as we get a little bit further into today's presentations. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to review the statutory authorities for annexation and also our requirements under the city charter for Proposition 400. These are really the legal underpinnings of what guides this process and the requirements that we'll be abiding by as staff in our management of this process. In addition to that overview, staff will be presenting a detailed planning analysis on an overview of both North and South annexations. And then, as I mentioned, today's focus will be the South annexation. In addition to the planning analysis by Planning Manager George Worley, we're going to have some drone footage, which is quite exciting to be able to show to the public and to the Commission. Joe Baines, our Recreation Services Director, will be narrating that footage and pointing out specific features to the Commission. I think it will be very helpful for everyone to be able to see what the interior of the project looks like because it's not extremely accessible at this point by normal vehicular access. So we will be looking at that drone footage, and if the Commission has any questions or comments and would like to see any of it again, please just raise your hand. We'll take a pause and we'll figure out what it is you'd like to see more closely or review again. We'll, of course, have Commission discussion and questions after the staff presentation and the drone footage. The applicant is here, and he is available and will be presenting to you as well. And, of course, we go back to Commission discussion and questions specifically of the applicant or with staff on any process questions. And then, of course, a very important component of our public hearing process today is public participation. We are going to have some presentations by Save the Dells representatives. These have been prearranged through our office. We also have in-person attendees who have submitted speaker cards, and they will be speaking to the Commission with their comments and or questions. And then our Zoom attendees are able to actually raise their hand electronically and be called upon, so we'll be coordinating that as we move through the public participation aspect. Again, just a quick overview. This is a lot of text on a slide, but a number of weeks ago, the Commission received some planning and zoning training, and a part of that was the overview of our annexation statute. ARS 9-471 sets forth all of the steps that must be taken in order to annex property into a municipality. The application for annexation of unincorporated property requires very specific procedural steps. I won't go into all of the nitty-gritty details, but essentially it kicks off with the filing of a blank petition with the county recorder, which establishes an intent to annex property. The statute sets forth a number of required waiting periods, including a 60-day public comment period between the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendations and the Council's review and potential actions on the annexation. A minimum requirement for annexation is a 300-foot contiguous boundary to the existing municipal boundary. That has been satisfied in both of these cases. And then, of course, there are a number of publication of notices, notifications to adjacent property owners, which we sent out about 600 written notifications via snail mail to adjacent property owners in the vicinity of these projects, and multiple required physical postings so that people have awareness of what our agenda is and following normal public hearing process. The statute further requires review by the municipality's governing body at a public hearing. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a prequel to that. Your recommendations will be considered at public hearing by the City Council, in addition to the cumulative public comment that is received during that public comment period that I referenced. Review by the municipality's governing body at public hearing will require, in this case, 3 formal actions per application. Those are on the annexation itself and an acceptance of the city's equivalent zoning, an approval of a master plan, and finally, in this case, a rezoning to the desired zoning districts that would allow for the density of the proposed project. Once all of these activities occur, the petition is finalized and an annexation ordinance is adopted by the City Council, effectively approving the annexation. Another legal underpinning that we need to observe in this case is Prop 400. Prop 400 was adopted by the City of Prescott voters in 2005, It requires that annexations of 250 acres or more are subject to additional specific requirements. Again, the 60-day public comment period, which is after planning and zoning review and recommendations have been rendered, but before city council action. The Prop 400 provisions also require a 3/4 supermajority vote by city council. In this case, that is 6 out of 7 votes. And an additional requirement is that all effluent from annexed areas must go towards permanent recharge of the aquifer. So a conservation measure was included in the proposition that the voters adopted. Oops. With that, I'm going to turn it over to George Worley, our planning manager, for the overview of the projects.
Thank you, Bryn, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a proposed annexation of 2 huge areas of town. Do you have any questions? No, never mind. I'm going to do a very high-level look at the 2 in relation to the current city boundaries and the airport, which is in the center, basically, of these 2 areas. And then we'll start with a more thorough look at the South Annexation, which is the one that's had far more attention from both the public and staff because of its proximity to the Dells and to existing residential neighborhoods nearby. So if you will indulge me, we'll start with this first look, and this is basically a view from orbit, so to speak. The city's airport is in the middle. The AED North Annexation boundary is here. So this area is not contiguous to any of the major roadways existing yet. There are other properties already within the city limits that belong to AED that have a portion of a roadway, and I'll show you this again a little bit later when we get to the access slides, that would be the point of contact for vehicular traffic to get into this lower area. You can see this lighter area. This is actually the Granite Creek Wash. That area will provide somewhat of a barrier between the 2 portions of the annexation area. A portion of this is proposed to be industrial, and we'll look at that a little later. It adjoins the city's industrial. Same over here, portion of this adjacent. And then this portion is adjacent to the runway, and we'll talk about that as well. On the South Annexation, again, the one that's had the most public attention so far, it adjoins Granite Dells Estates. This subdivision's been in the city for 10 years approximately. A lot of development has occurred already right in this corner, and the major access points will go through here, so I'll show you those as well. The wash, of course, cuts through, and on this side of the wash is Walden Ranch. I think it's being marketed as Walden Farms. That location, sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing. That location is also very well developed. It is roughly 2/3 developed, built out of the lots that have been platted. The Granite Dells themselves are the rocky area down here. They pass through and across and all the way over to, this is Willow Creek Road, and if you recall, we annexed property that became Whispering Rock subdivision. That series of rock outcroppings are contiguous and continuous all the way through here. So that gives you sort of a perspective of the 2 annexations, and it shows clearly why they are 2 annexations. At no point do the 2 touch one another, and because of that, we have to process them independently by state law. So Bryn talked to you a bit about the revised statutes in Proposition 400 and the various requirements that apply to what you're going to be looking at today. And I will touch on a few pieces of those as we go further along with the actions that you have to take as part of your responsibility as Planning Commission. So there are 3 primary actions that are necessary for each of the 2 annexations. A recommendation of city equivalent zoning to the county. The state law says when you first annex property in from the county, you have to establish a city zoning that is equivalent to, but no denser than, no more residential density than what the county would have allowed. You have a requirement under Prop 400 to review and recommend a master plan. You can make recommendations as it's presented. You can make recommendations with modifications, but we need a recommendation from you. That recommendation, specifically the master plan part of the recommendation, is also, per Prop 400, the trigger for the 60-day public review and comment period that Brent talked to you about. It's tied to the master plan, and as soon as you vote on them, this 60-day period begins. We open it up for additional public comment. We've received a lot of public comment over the past couple of years for this particular project because it's been such a high priority for so many people in the city. And then your final step will be a recommendation for the rezoning request that's part of this application. And we'll talk a little bit about the zoning and it needing to match up with the city's general plan and with the master plan that's proposed. So specifically, we're going to drop down to AED South. Just to give you another perspective, the airport is almost immediately north of this location, off of this map. Also, Granite Dells Estate subdivision and Walden Ranch or Walden Farms, just to give you that perspective once again. So your first
George,
requirement.
you may have before, but would you explain the blue lines on the map, please?
So the blue lines are the current city limit lines. So these are areas already inside the city. Granite Dells Estates is inside. This area along 89A is inside. Walden Farms inside. This area is outside the city limits and includes all of this. It includes this and this, which are in the county now and will remain in the county except for the boundaries of AED's annexation. And this boundary actually shows some property that's not part of the annexation itself, and we'll talk about that with the master plan and the zoning request. And thank you, Mr. Gambogi. I was going to suggest if you have questions about a specific slide or topic that I'm talking about, feel free to ask. So current county zoning is a pretty simple thing. The city looks at what that zoning is. In this case, there are 3 zoning districts that cover the property that's being annexed: R1L 18, R1L 35, and RCU 2A. Those county designations are all residential, and they vary by minimum lot size. And I'll get into that with the chart here that just shows the difference between the two. So the county says RCU 2A. The 2A actually means 2-acre minimum zoning. The only city equivalent is RE 2-acre, again, minimum 2-acre lot requirement. So the initial zoning of the RCU 2A areas will go to RE 2A. Same with these. RL 35 is equivalent to our SF 35, minimum lot sizes. The same with the RL 18 and our SF 18. So in this particular case, there's not much of a choice to be made between the county zoning and which city zoning is equivalent. It's pretty much a technicality that we just need to state that we've made that determination as part of the state law requirement for annexations. Access to the property is an interesting one for a couple of the commissioners who tried to get out there recently. Basically, you can't get there from here. In both cases, the north and the south, there's no real street connectivity yet to the property that's accessible. One of the reasons that the annexations are placed the way they are would be to allow connectivity to existing street infrastructure, and some of that's pointed out here. So as you're headed east on State Route 89A from State Route 89, there is a Granite Dells Parkway interchange, and that Granite Dells Parkway interchange will allow access both north and south. It has 2 existing roundabouts in there now. It provides the primary access to the industrial subdivisions here, the Centerpoint East and West, and to Granite Dells Estates. That will also provide primary access through Granite Dells Estates on pre-planned roadway connections to the AED property. So when Granite Dells Estates was platted, roadways were stubbed to the edge of the property to allow future development to connect to those roadway systems. That will allow the initial primary access. At some point in the future, the city has been planning and collecting impact fees for a potential future crossing of Granite Creek here. Again, as Walden Ranch was developed and subdivision platted, a stub street connection was made to allow that connection to occur, and that would provide a secondary access into AED. You'll notice both of these accesses are to the north. There's one final way in. It's through this subdivision, but it would take access via this same route. So this is Centerpoint East, and Centerpoint East has a street that comes down and will connect here. It is an industrial area. It's unlikely that will be used for anything other than secondary or tertiary access to the property. It certainly wouldn't be considered a primary access point. So initially, the development will connect here. There is existing roadways to the south that, the old alignment of 89A, if you've been here long enough, you recall that alignment ran sort of diagonally across here. It's still existing, but it crosses a bridge that probably is not sufficiently designed for vehicular traffic today. It's a very old bridge. There's no plans at this point with this development or under city review to allow for vehicular access across here without doing some major changes, and that would be something that a public review process would require. So no plans to make a vehicular access to the subdivisions through this access here. We always look at general plan land uses and proposed densities when we look at annexations. If there's a general plan designation established for property that's proposed for annexation, then we look at it in relation to the proposed uses, proposed master plans, and proposed zoning that come with that annexation. In this particular case, we have a couple of zoning designations land use designations that are interesting. One is the commercial employment, which is here. That actually will show on their master plan as an area they proposed for hotel resort type of facility. And it's a permitted use under this district. It was intended for that type of thing, where you would have an employment, some level of commercial, primarily not a residential use. And then the other designation that's of interest is the low to moderate density designation. That's 1 to 7 units per acre. That generally is approximate to the city's single-family 6 zoning. It's slightly less dense than single-family 6, but close. And then the last area down here is actually one that isn't going to make much difference in this particular case because of the master plan's designation of all of this area as open space. So that designation allows open space by right. We don't need to amend the master plan to allow an open space use there. The city may choose to do that at some point in the future, but it's not a necessary action, not a requirement. So just briefly, a quick look at the master plan. And again, we talked about all of the open space proposed in the lower area. This area is designated and set aside for potential resort. That area is about half of the area that was set aside for the potential future commercial employment under the general plan when it was adopted in 2015. But it would allow that resort use in that location. And then this is a combination of single-family lots and multifamily zoning that would fall under the density requirements of the low to medium when you add up all of the properties involved. Density is a determination made by the entire property and then figuring out how many units are proposed. So it's not a density per particular area, it's a density for the entire annexation area. Above that, this area is primarily intended for relatively small lot residential development, very similar to Granite Dells Estate, which I apologize, I managed to stick the key on top of, but Granite Dells Estates is under there and developed already, or developing already. This is the Centerpoint East that I talked about in a light industrial area. It's mostly general business park in layout, but it allows light industrial uses. That area immediately adjoins the annexation here. And within that area, the proposal is to go with some form of multifamily apartment-type development, which tends to have a better buffer to heavier intensity uses, commercial uses, than single family does. Some of that's by design of complexes. If you build apartment buildings, you have large parking areas, you have large landscaping requirements, you generally have a bigger buffer between the actual residential unit and neighboring properties. So good planning practice generally encourages multifamily between commercial uses and single family to provide that kind of buffer. In this case, this is a little bit unusual with most of our applications. The master plan and the zoning look different. Because of the designations that were chosen by the applicant and requested by the applicant of single family 6 for this area, again, SF6, that is almost identical. The boundaries are identical. The requested uses basically line up between the two maps with almost no change whatsoever. The one change that does occur, and I mentioned it earlier, in the master plan is an area here that is actually left outside of the city, it'll stay in the county, but is part of the master planning of the overall area. It doesn't have to be annexed for the use that's proposed. It's going to be an open adjunct to the open space use, and it can remain in the county. Because of the county road rights of way between these properties and the properties that will annex into the city if this is approved, it's more complicated to try to annex them than it is to leave them out. And there's no deficit, there's no downside to the city not annexing those pieces because there's no development proposed to occur on them that could potentially affect the rest of the properties or properties nearby. So again, back to the zoning, which doesn't include those because the zoning will only be inside the city. Multifamily, high density up here, allowing the apartment complexes. Single family 6, which would allow lots as small as 6,000 square feet, which is roughly equivalent to Granite Dells Estates. They're split between single family 6 and single family 9 as far as their lots up here. Resort area would be a special planned communities district. SPC is a sub-master plan requirement by zoning for that particular area. So at some time in the future, prior to development of that site, a closer zoomed in, so to speak, master plan of that area will be required. The SPC district says, show us the layout, show us how you're going to build it, show us where it's going to connect. And then that process goes through a separate review. You will probably see that again in the future. And then last but certainly not least, a significant area of open space, approximately 475 plus or minus acres in total, which encompasses much of the central Rocky area that is under private ownership within the Dells. So that's a coup for the city to end up with that in our control. Ren mentioned a
George,
video.
you might point out what those brown lines are in the NOS.
Oh, within the middle of it? Yes, I apologize. So these are actually the Peavine Trail right-of-way and the Iron King Trail right-of-way. So these are old railroad beds. Those rights-of-way are existing. They are not part of the master plan. They will be part of the annexation. Currently, they don't have a zoning in the county. They could or could not have a zoning in the city. We have gone back and forth between zoning road rights-of-way or not zoning road rights-of-way. Do you have a question, sir? Sorry.
I
Yes,
do,
sir.
George. The area in green to the west of D&G, is that the AED private open space that's on the map?
Yeah, there's a little bit of area along here that is it's not an NOS, which is natural open space, basically no development. This would be a recreation space type of use. It's actually in the wash of Granite Creek. So it's within the wash of Granite Creek and it can't be built on given the floodway restrictions on it. And Bryn mentioned a video of a drone video of the area. Our recreation director, Joe Baines, is going to walk you through that. So give me just a moment to get that up. click on it, it's going to go. It just goes right away.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to straight one time,
And then I'll back it up. Perfect.
Morning, Commissioners. Joe Baines, I'm the Recreation Services Director for the City of Prescott. I think we'll just play this through one time, and then if you don't mind, I'll stop it, go back through it, and stop at certain points. It's only about 4 minutes long. Okay, we were going to put it to music, but we couldn't find the right AC/DC tune. But anyway,
Joe?
now, yeah.
Joe, this is Ted Gambogi. I felt like I was sitting in the front row of a movie theater watching a Star Wars movie. Is it possible to show where the access road would cross the Peavine Trail in this video?
Yes, Mr. Gamboa, that's my intent, and the next time around, I'll stop and kind of point out some key points, and if you have questions along the way, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer those, or I could answer them afterwards as well.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
George Lee, is there any reference through the presentation of the video that you're just showing us where we could have, where you're pointing out the Peavine Trail and you're pointing out the future park and the housing and all these things, where we could also have a side of the map? So when you're speaking to that and you point to it on the video, we know exactly where it is on the map, because I know there's so many areas that you pointed out about housing that I had no idea which piece it was, other than if it was close to where the resort's going to be.
Commissioner Lee, I'm not sure I have that capability, but I can certainly from memory tell you what areas, as I stop it, I can say that's area G or K or whatever. So hopefully that'll reference well enough for you.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom
Joe?
Hutchison here. One more question. While you're doing that, are there any special areas, any sacred grounds, anything that we ought to be cognizant of that you could show us where that's at?
Commissioner Hutchinson, I think later in the presentation, there'll be some discussion around some Indian artifacts or ruins that are potentially in the subdivision. You know, the Peavine historically was an old rails to trails conversion, so a lot of great history here. I think the ranching started in the late 1880s, 1890s, somewhere in there. So there's historical significance in that perspective.
And by the way, thank you for this footage. It helps a lot.
Yeah, I thought it would be
Nicely
helpful.
done. What a gem. What a jewel of
Thank you.
piece of property.
And I'd like to thank Greg Revido for doing this last minute for us. He had already accumulated some footage, but as most of you probably know, we have to get permission from the airport to fly it, and it's really not just a go out there and have fun kind of a thing. He's a professional, so I'll thank him for that.
Joe, Don Michaelman,
Yes.
when you go through your presentation, would it be possible, and you may have this already planned at it, to say what direction the drone is facing and over what section of the potential annexation that is hovering at that time?
Good point, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's one of the points I would like to bring up is
Thank you.
we're looking north, we're looking south. Do we have a paper copy of the areas so that I can reference? It's, yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Here's the annexation in reverse.
Yeah. Let's do it over. Okay, so now we're looking north. The reference to the Point of Rocks, that's another historic landmark that's been talked about for years and always seems to be a point of reference when we're talking about this area. But we're looking to the north right now. So the future resort that they just pointed out, that would be K and L on the map. That'd be just to the right of the screen, right up there.
Joe, could you pause it there? This is Greg Lozelle. The fence line we're seeing in the lower right there, it looks like a fence post there, below the Peavine. Do you see what I'm
Okay,
talking
I see
about?
it, yes.
Is that the Peavine easement?
That is roughly the right-of-way in there. The right-of-way in there runs between 100 feet and 200 feet. Some of it's 200 and some of it's 100. We think that roughly that fence runs along what would be the right-of-way, approximately. These future residences that are pointed to in this would be in the area of H and F, and maybe a little bit of G off to your left of the screen there. And feel free to stop me anytime. I'll stop when I think there's something relevant, but if you guys want me to stop at any other point, just let me know.
Joe, could you back up a little bit and show us where that hotel is supposed to be? Again?
Okay, right, this reference point right here, this would be the resort. How high up on the hill it goes, I don't know. Roughly that open space line runs down in here, but that's generally the area of the resort. That would be K and L on your map. Okay, here where it says crossing, that one of the commissioners referenced, that'll be roughly the area of the crossing of the Peavine. We'll be looking at different options of potentially going over, going under. It's premature at this point, since we're post-engineering to really figure out what we're doing, but we are starting to rattle the cage a little bit, provided the annexation moves forward on what that looks like. That'll be a big task for us.
Joe, with the Don Michaelman, when the option is determined, is that going to be a joint decision between the city and the applicant?
It likely will be, Commissioner Michaelman. We will have to work together to figure out what the best way to do that would be. And it could be a combination of over and under. It could be, there's a lot of different options in there, but that, without any engineering being involved at this point, it's really difficult to say. But yes, it will be thoroughly vetted between the developer and the city of Prescott.
And both parties have to come agreement. It can't be just one-sided.
That's correct. Per the letter of intent, that's correct.
Joe, Greg Lozelle here. Just so there's a scale, what's the height, do you best guess that trail is above the property down below?
It's probably about a 40-foot embankment from the top of the trail to the bottom. But I will point out that just down in this area right here, we are technically into the area that's been designated as open space. So if we were to move the crossing further down here, there would have to be a discussion around that. And it's really difficult to tell exactly where that lays out on here, but it's marginal. Okay, so now we're looking south, and if you look, you see the large hill on your left, and look to the hill back in the middle there. That is roughly, the base of that hill is roughly about the south boundary of the Arizona Eco property. So the scale of this thing is huge. From there all the way up to where just below where the resort would be. That gives you a little bit of a scale of the size of this property. Again, we're looking to the south.
Joe, that is what is commonly known that we're looking at now as the Dells.
That is correct. The Dells extends on both sides of Highway 89, but this is probably the most prominent part of the Dells, I would say. So directly in front of the screen there is very important. The creek, No Name Creek, doesn't have a name. At this point, it's probably too late. But anyway, it's a very significant riparian area. It's also a very significant wildlife corridor. And as you'll see a little while further in the video, there's been cattle tanks in the Wilkinson's Ranch that were constructed that actually serve as watering holes for the game and makes it a very, very viable wildlife corridor. So this is a really important part of it. We speak a lot to the significance of the dells and the rocks, but this riparian area is really unique to Arizona, and it's in pretty pristine condition.
Joe, one more question. The crossing of the Peavine Trail will not be at grade on the Peavine. I just want to make sure of that because I can't imagine having an intersection on top of the Peavine Trail where you got vehicles going back and forth to the resort.
Commissioner Lee, there is existing an at-grade crossing on the Peavine that works fairly well. I agree, and I think most people agree, we're going to do everything that we can to go over or under, but per our letter of intent, it is over, under, or across. But certainly, we all agree. We would certainly prefer to be over or under, and that's what we'll work towards.
Yes, and I hope so because there's so much history on that Peavine Trail, as it is on the Iron King.
Correct. Thank you. So again, here's those cattle tanks that were constructed, and very, very important to the wildlife and the wildlife corridor. And again, I can't emphasize enough how important this riparian area is to the open space. It really works well with, the dells and the rocks and everything, but certainly this wildlife corridor would be an important component of that open space. Okay, so now we're looking south again, roughly at the intersection of the Iron King and the Peavine. Point of Rocks on your left. Now we're back to going to the north. Here's the intersection of the Iron King and the Peavine. Peavine will go off to your left up here. Well, we didn't quite get there. So the property off to your right here is significant as well. This would be to the east of the Peavine Trail, the Iron King right here. Very nice rock formations in here and a lot of recreation opportunities. So these areas referenced here would be, again, H, D, F, maybe even going that far one, going all the way up to B. So right in there, and everything on that west side of the Peavine.
We may have a challenge here, because I think we have 4 council members here. And maybe, John, you want to explain this?
We're a little bit ahead. During public comment session, since we have a quorum of the council, and I believe we have 4 here, and I think we have a few on Zoom, we're going to request that council members do not speak to avoid an open meeting law issue, because we only have a courtesy notice. I also understand that there is a quorum of our Airport Advisory Committee, so if you are a member of the Airport Advisory Committee, we'll also ask you not to comment at this point in time, and there may be opportunities in the future.
Okay, here's Highway 89. Just to the right of where the box is for the Highway 89, to give you some reference, that's the old pinyon pines there. And this area down below would be, which will be referenced a little bit later, what we envision as a future park. We want to be very cognizant of how we bring people into this, respecting other people's property rights, personal property rights. We will be working as a part of the North Area Planning to work with a planner to kind of put the details together. But in general, we look at this area as the entry to the park, and probably a less intense kind of a park where people can enter the park and then, of course, go anywhere from there. But this would kind of be the entry point. At least that's what we envision right now, pre-planning. Okay, here's the old bridge that was referenced, which, by the way, was built in 1922. There were some modifications done in 1980, but that would not necessarily be something we would see that would be able to convey traffic very safely. But this is Granite Creek that runs right through here. Again, part of that pristine riparian area that, we want to have a light hand on the land, but we do see this as a great amenity to this whole open space acquisition. Okay, so the future housing that we're showing right here would be parcels H and G, probably looking to the what would be the northeast. Okay, so now we're looking to the south, and this feature housing that's referenced here would be roughly HF right in that area there. Again, HF on your map.
Which way are we looking, Joe?
Okay, right now we are looking back to we spun around, so we're looking to the north and the west a little bit. This is in general the meadow that's referred to where there's been identified possibly some Indian artifacts or ruins or whatever in this general area. Okay, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any further questions.
Excellent film. I think that really helped me a lot be able to see it from above and different things there, since it is challenging to get back in there. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Joe?
Tom Hutchison here. Joe, I'm not sure this is a question for you or for George, but do we believe that there'll be that the access road will be sufficient enough to handle commercial traffic and all the residential traffic that's going to be generated by this?
Commissioner Hutchinson, I can tell you that our engineering staff will certainly look and build the road infrastructure appropriate to what the uses would be.
Joe, Butch Tracy. Question on those ponds that you showed. Are any of those naturally occurring, or are they all stock tanks that we see up through there?
No, they were all stock tanks, as you know from
And
growing
then
up here.
with the use of this area, does that allow for maintenance and so on to get back in there to do the type of work that occurs just over time?
Certainly, we'll have to evaluate that, and there are some breaches that I've seen that probably would require to tidy them up a little bit. I imagine it's probably been a little while since they've been, actively used. So to answer your question, that'll be something that we probably need to look at, to go in there and clean that up a little bit so they can be functional for the wildlife.
Okay, thank you. Also, great presentation.
Thank you.
It really does help. That enlightens me anyway. So.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to go back to the boring non-video presentation. Thanks,
George,
Joe.
you may want to take your mask off and
I
talk a
will.
little louder there.
Sorry. All right, I think we had just talked a little bit about the master plan, and I think it's important to, again, reference back in your mind the various areas that were shown on that video. Most of the video covered this area. It's in the center of the property. It's a key area as part of the negotiations that have occurred so far related to the letter of intent in the development agreement. One thing that is important too, I think, to keep in mind from that video is the look to the north and northwest that showed all of that relatively flat area that has traditionally been ranching and farming. This area is completely different topographically than the area within the Dells. There's a rather abrupt cutoff point in here and No Name Creek just to the north of that cutoff point that makes for a very logical point of change between the developed area and the area to be left as open space.
George, could you give me a ballpark idea how much higher is K and L over, say, G and H?
I don't have an idea of that Based on the drone footage, it's tens, if not dozens of feet higher along the top of this area than this area. You'll notice, or will have noticed in the video presentation, that while the Peavine Trail is elevated, again, keep in mind it was a railroad bed, was elevated above the area on both sides, the elevation difference between the west side and the east side was significant. This lower level is much lower than the lower level in here. And as you go up the slope to where the resort is, you're coming closer and closer to being at the same elevation as the Peavine Trail. Somewhere in approximately this vicinity, it becomes almost an at-grade situation where there's a very slight slope as opposed to what you saw in the video in the southern area where there's a significant difference between the level of the trail and the level of the ground on either side. Again, the relatively flat topography extends all the way up to and includes the industrial development to the north, so all of this higher density type of development would occur on relatively flat ground as compared to all of the other property associated with the South Annexation. The zoning, again, conforms to what was proposed in the master plan, identically. The master plan uses for higher density single family and the SF6 designation conform, the multifamily conforms, and the resort conforms with its SPC, Special Plan Communities zoning proposal. One thing we always look at in any developments near the airport are impacts on the airport. And we have an airport-specific area plan. It's one of 3 specific area plans the city has adopted over the years for particular areas that needed some additional focus when development projects occur. Within the SPC, airport-specific area plans, we look at the types of uses in relation to the impacts on the airport or from air operations. So we want to protect both the airport from development and the development from impacts that may be caused by overflights of aircraft. It's a mutually beneficial review of those 2 types of impact. In our specific area plan, there are two designations in land use that are a focus with the South Annexation. The first area up here is actually combined 2 areas, includes a commercial area and a commercial recreation area. Both allow residential uses, though this commercial area discourages them. This area is a low to moderate income, low to medium density residential. This area is almost entirely within that open space designation that we looked at on the master plan. So while it allows residential uses, none are proposed, the area will be open space instead. Back up to this area, one of the things that the airport-specific area plan did was to create a series of impact zones with limitations within them. There are 6 total zones that control, to a fairly significant degree, whether or not residential uses can be within those areas. The only one of the 6 that allows residential with some restrictions is Zone 6, and that impacts the South Annexation right in here. This is the Zone 6 line, with a corner of that annexation area being within Zone 6, and that area will probably not be allowed to have residential uses. It may have other uses such as, again, we're at the very north end of the annexation, multifamily. That could be parking for the multifamily development. It just can't be the actual buildings for the multifamily. The residential units would need to stay out of 6. We do have Dr. Robin Sabata, the airport director, here, and I have several slides of hers that follow this that I think it would be very helpful to have her walk through and talk to you about airport concerns and airport suggestions as associated with this annexation. So if I can turn them over to you. The presentation is up. You can click the left button to advance.
Sorry, thank you. Hello, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Robin Sabata, the Airport Director, and it's great to meet all of you. So I have an opportunity here to share with you this airport-specific area plan, and we refer to it as the ASAP. And it actually dates back to 2001, and a resolution was passed. That's Resolution 3363, and it's been amended actually a total, or reaffirmed a total of 9 additional times since then, often associated with major developments. So the purpose of the ASAP is in making decisions regarding future uses and development of property in the vicinity of the airport. Both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council shall take into consideration the ASAP recommendations. So this is a whopper of a document, and I'm going to boil it down in about 6 slides for you so that you can understand what your role may be in using that document to take into consideration your future decisions. So the ASAP actually contains a land use plan. It also has airport impact zones I'm going to show you, a 60 DNL noise contour, which is a modeled contour based on noise, and it was adopted to limit damage caused by a possible aviation accident, to protect the viability of the airport, and also to limit overflight and noise over residential areas. In addition to this ASAP plan, which is by resolution from the council, we have an FAA grant assurance requirement. That is when we receive a grant from the FAA, and in the last 2.5 years, we've received more than $15 million in grants, actually about 18 million. We are required for 20 years, or the life of the object purchased, to maintain our grant assurances. So one requirement relates to compatible land use. And it says the airport sponsor must take appropriate action to the extent reasonable, including the adoption of zoning laws, to restrict the use of land to or in the immediate vicinity of the airport to activities and purposes compatible with normal aircraft operations. So those are sort of the foundation of the airport's position. So these are the 6 airport impact zones and the 2009 baseline 60 DNL noise contour. It was developed with FAA guidance, and if you can see, you'll see the inner zones 1, 2, and 4 are actually the approach and the departure paths coming in. And this is actually a total of 3 runways. So there is a parallel, and it's a second staggered parallel. This is our main commercial service. And then there's actually a crosswind runway right here. So there are a number of these different areas that we take into consideration when we're looking at this. And know that these are modeled contours, which means that a person is actually flying a plane and they may not fly what's modeled. So we are going to show you some actual flight tracking in the future slides. So when this was developed, it was determined that impact zone 6, like George had mentioned, thank you, George, that habitable buildings must be constructed using noise attenuation techniques to limit the noise within each structure. We're looking at an attenuation to a level that's at or below 45 decibels. No habitable buildings are actually permitted within anywhere in the 60 DNL noise contour. In zones, impact zones 1 through 5, no new residential development is permitted or within the 60 DNL noise contour unless it's an existing parcel and they're building out. Now, there is one exception for some student dorms that are okay in zone 3 that date way back to when Embry-Riddle thought they might build some dorms. But other than that, there's a lot of restrictions. So can you see all the numbers up here, 4, 6, 3? That's referring to the zones around the airport. So another area you need to know about is the airport influence area. This is where an aviation easement needs to be signed, and it's actually, the intent is to inform owners and potential purchasers that there'll possibly be aircraft overflight in this area. And the ASAP recommends that any habitable buildings that are outside all those other zones we talked about, but within this impact area, and that includes the parcel down here, and we'll be showing you those in just a moment, that those be constructed using noise attenuation techniques to limit noise within the structure.
Robin?
Yeah.
Greg Lizelle.
Hi, Greg.
The numbers, is 6 louder than 4?
6 is further away and it's less noisy,
Okay.
but there will be an ample amount of overflight in 6. So actually what we wanted to show you here is the map's a little distorted because we were compressing it onto slides, but this is basically a combination of a few things. This box right here is the one you just saw where the aviation easements are. These numbers reflect section numbers. This diagonal one is actually called the Public Airport Disclosure Map, and that's actually required by Arizona Revised Statutes. It's posted on the Arizona Real Estate webpage, and it's our official notification of the runway patterns and also areas of major influence. The reason there's a second little extension here is that is the proposed extension of the runway. This is actually 91,000 radar tracks out of the 235,000 total operations we had in 2019. So we were able to pull those radar tracks, and what this shows is as it gets more red, there's more density of traffic. As it gets yellow, it's less, and there's some blue out here, and that's all aircraft overflight. And you can see it does extend beyond the disclosure boxes. For your information, we are the 45th busiest airport in the country. There are more than 20,000 landing sites, so we're a pretty airport. And because of COVID this year, midway through the year, we actually exceed Oakland International Airport in the number of takeoffs and landings. So a lot of people are really surprised. We are looking at increase in our flight training operations, and we do expect that we should be from 232 in 2019. By the time we complete the next 2 years, we will likely be over 300,000 operations. That's aircraft taking off and landing. So it's a really busy airport. It's not a little rural airport. And the air carrier traffic is only about 1% of that total operation. So the majority of those flights are general aviation, flight training. We also have a lot of U.S. Forest Service operations. That's those red and white airplanes you've probably seen taking off and landing. So this is AED North. And AED North, what we did is we superimposed all of those surfaces that we just briefed you on. So here's the disclosure box. Here's the navigation easements. That's the influence area inside, right here. Here is the zones, the impact zones, okay? So you can see those as they are superimposed over the property. The only place that we understand that residential will occur is here, which is outside of the 6 impact zones, okay? Now what you can see in the background is flight tracks from May and October of 2019. Just to give you an idea, you can see that while it's not perfect, it does capture some of the activity under those zones, but the actual overflight activity could be quite significant. And one thing that's different about this airport than other airports, say Luke Air Force Base or Scottsdale Airport, 75% of pilots that take off stay in the pattern, which means they linger in this space longer around the airport. Typically, less than 25% will stay in the pattern. Sometimes it's as low as 5 or 10% at most airports. So what we've done is we've done an analysis of AED North, and what we say is, first of all, thank you very much for the proposed approach protection, because this is significant. You can see the amount of overflight in the proposed approach protection that we would be getting in the airport impact zone, and it also allows us the opportunity to do a runway extension. And this is really important because during certain summer months, because we are a very hot and very high airport, our runway is too short for our commercial service aircraft, and they cannot sell seats on board that airplane because of the fact that the runway is not long enough. So we really appreciate this amazing benefit as a result of this particular annexation. With regard to the ASAP, we've done some analysis. There will be some airspace and obstruction studies that will need to be done, both from the FAA perspective and the air carrier perspective, to assure a single engine safe departure. There will be navigation easements, and that we do require residential interior soundproofing within certain specified zones and throughout the AIA per the ASAP. There is one school that's being proposed for this area right here. It's a school or a park, may just be a park, but if it's a school, we recommend that it be pushed a little bit farther out. You see how it's a little bit lighter out here, and it's a little bit darker in the overflight here? It would benefit the students greatly, we believe, if it would be both interior soundproof leveled at the NIH and the Transportation Research Board recommended levels of 45 decibels for sound mitigation to promote optimal learning if there's a school there. There is an amendment, it's called Figure 6 in the ASAP.
Robin, can I stop you for a minute?
Sure.
Robin, Tom Hutchison here.
Hi, Tom.
You mentioned that there's a lot of air traffic that stays in the pattern.
That's correct.
If you're general aviation and you're in the pattern, looking to land on 21 left, wouldn't in fact you be flying over this major residential area that's up for discussion today?
Yes, you would enter the pattern probably right about here, and then you would come in. There are multiple places you can enter the pattern, but you would enter. See how the circle's up here? Right here. So you're talking about 2-1 left. This is the approach end of 2-1 left right here. And I enter the pattern and come around and land here. I would depart
Robin.
this way. Sure.
I think what we're looking at there is the northern annexation. And
That
we
is
need to
correct.
deal with the southern annexation only right now, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the very next slide.
Okay.
Okay. So these are the recommended ASAP amendments for rezoning. And then the AED South annexation. So this is a depiction of just this blue area here, which is the AED South. So we can focus on that. There are other parcels that are involved up here, but this is what we're focusing on. You can see the edge of the airport impact area where the easements are required. This line is approximate. We have to go back and make sure. I think it might be a little bit up or a little bit down from here. This is the airport disclosure box that goes on the Arizona Department of Real Estate website. And you can see this is well outside with the exception of what George mentioned, the top end of 6. Okay? So likewise, we need to have airspace obstruction studies. This does not limit the airspace obstructions. The FAA has an obstruction analysis process, which means we'll have those evaluated. Individuals will have to have easements in this area and interior residential soundproofing in accordance with the zones or the AIA, depending on which one they're in. So we're recommending an adjustment of the land use in the ASAP by amendment. We believe it can be consistent with this, and it can move from commercial employment as specified to commercial recreational to the AED proposed land use and density. The DA will also, that's something John is mentioning, but only briefly, that's not available to you, but some of the other items of concern will be mentioned in here, including the habitable structure, interior sound mitigation, some through the fence items associated with this property, some signage that they should have for the property to alert them to aircraft. And then ultimately, I think you can see this Section 31 will be addressed as well because that's a very high overflight area that's of concern to the flight community. And that's it.
Questions of Robin? I have one. On the cross runway, how active is that? And what's the usual direction for takeoff and landings?
Of course, it varies with wind and it varies with season. So there are approximately 40 to 45,000 total operations that occur off of that one crosswind runway annually. Right now, based on the current expected forecasted growth, we are looking at the possibility of that going to 60,000. And by far, the most noise complaints we get are here in this area, here from Walden Farms. And we've gotten a few up here from the new Saddlewood, and then, of course, Pinion. Right here is Pinion Oaks. Those where we get the majority of the concerns, although it does come from Prescott Valley as well.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Appears to be no more questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very helpful.
And for the record, we only have 2 advisory board members in presence, so they have not gotten.
Do we know on Zoom?
There's one on Zoom, so it's not 4.
George,
we've
before
covered
we
a-
start again, I believe we have another city council member who joined us, Billy Orr, on that. And I don't think I've missed anybody else, have I? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as a result of the discussion we've had about, sorry, I know. As a result of the discussions we had earlier, Brent talked to you about Proposition 400, and we've mentioned the 60-day review period, public review and comment period that's triggered by your actions. Until you're ready to take action on both the north and the south annexations, staff is requesting you not take action independently on one or the other, primarily so that we don't have that 60-day period offset and running in parallel but out of sequence with each other. We do have a number of folks who have requested time to make a presentation to you from the Save the Dells organization. We also have a number of folks who are on our Zoom calls who would like to make comments, and we have comment cards from some of the attendees in the room. What I would suggest is perhaps at this point, let's take a short break. We'll get the presentations for the Save the Dells folks up for you and let them walk through those and take the public comments. And if we want to move into AED North, we would be ready to do that at your discretion. Or we can defer that and start it fresh and do a complete review at your next meeting if that's your choice. Do you have
We also
questions?
have the applicant to make a presentation too?
Yes, he would like
Okay.
to talk before we move into the next phase, the public phase.
Okay.
Just a quick housekeeping question. These two, north and south, are two separate motions, correct, when that time comes?
Yes, they'll actually ultimately end up being 6 separate motions.
Okay.
But yes, they're separate actions, one tied to each of the 2 annexation areas.
Thank you.
All righty, why don't we go ahead and take about a 10-minute break then, okay?
George will have to
Let's
unmute
go
the
ahead and
computer,
reconvene our meeting,
but we're recording.
okay?
That's good.
The applicant, Mr. Giese, has asked to go after the public comments to give him an opportunity to respond to any of the questions that came up on that part.
That's
So-
correct. So given those circumstances, I think if you're fine, we can go to the next presentation.
Well, I'd still have a question for you, Joy, but we'll
Certainly.
take that. No, Dr. Rusing, come on. Yeah, go ahead, that's fine. Please give name and address, please.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
We test, okay. Next slide. Good morning, my name is Tom Rusing, 2194 Forest Mountain Road, Prescott, and a long-term resident. The purpose of my comments are to provide, the purpose of my remarks are to provide comments and recommendation for conservation buffers or transition zones between natural open space and developed areas. Our recommendations are consistent with the City of Prescott General Plan goals and strategies and the Open Space Master Plan. Next slide. The City of Prescott's 2008 Open Space Master Plan describes the desirability of transition zones between official open space and the developments surrounding them. Next slide. Conservation buffers are strips of vegetation and other natural landscape features placed or preserved in the landscape to reduce negative effects resulting from the abrupt transition between different land uses. They provide trail users with natural views of the trails rather than just views of residential walls, rooftops, and non-native landscaping. They beautify and maintain the beauty of the landscape and shield open space users and residents from negative visual impacts. They protect and improve soil and water resources. They help wildlife to fully utilize open spaces without feeling walled in, and they influence long-term resale value and appreciation of the area. Next slide. We have identified 3 areas that need to be planned in a manner to prevent negative transition effects where open space and development are in conflict. Blue Circle 1 between areas B, F, and H and the Peavine Trail that runs south to north. Proposed area number 2, proposed road, trail, and open space transitions through area H. And number 3, transition between areas K and L and the natural open space to the south. Next slide. In general, buffer zones should maintain natural vegetation and or be supplemented with native plants and include the removal of invasive, non-native plants. They should be designed appropriately to the specific terrain and location. They should encourage and not restrict wildlife movement, use materials and colors appearing to belong in the habitat, and prevent erosion and runoff. They should visually connect people to their surroundings. Next slide. Our recommendations for Area 1 and 2 are an attractive wall or fence is used as a screen between the development and the trail. 2 or 3 access points through and around the wall or fence to reduce social trail damage such as erosion, invasive species, and pet waste that can be caused by multiple access points through backyards. Keep or plant multi-level natural vegetation along the trail to improve the trail experience as well as provide privacy for the homeowners. Next slide. This slide depicts a good visual trail experience with multi-level vegetation. Next slide. This slide shows, in contrast, this slide shows local developments where the view from the trail is basically a sea of homes and rooftops and not a good visual experience. Next slide. Recommendations for Area 2. As the current proposal does not show the extension of the road and location of the trail crossing, we recommend the road should be in the middle of H for the lowest impact on trail and open space and not parallel or run along the trail. Crossing of H to K should be well separated from the open space to the south. There should be no at-grade crossing as it is restrictive, unsafe, and negates the high-quality experience of the National Historic Peavine Trail. Next slide. The top two photos show a local development with an at-grade crossing on the Peavine Trail and is not acceptable. There is poor visual experience, poor aesthetics, and it is less safe. The lower diagram shows a trail crossing below the road and is much better. For Area 3, the connections with the environment should be maintained in a manner to minimize structures and landforms that restrict vistas to and from the Peavine Trail. Development on this hillside would not be appropriate and not follow the intent of the general and open space plan. Development on the ridge, hilltop, or plateau should be done in a way that minimizes the impact on the trail experience, but also the views from the surrounding area. Next slide. The picture on the left is a local development that shows prominent two-story homes right on the edge of the plateau requiring an unattractive retaining wall. In contrast, a development in St. George, Utah shows single-story, lower-profile homes set back from the edge and no retaining wall. Much better visually. There are many examples of visionary cities that have worked with responsible developers, resulting in a development that the community can be proud of, that honors and protects the natural beauty of the area, the trail experience, and respects the desires of the community. We hope our comments will be helpful as you move through your portion of the process, and we will be happy to meet with the Planning and Zoning Commission at any time in the future to further discuss this important project. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. George, will the commission members be able to get copies of these slides in?
Yes, sir. We can send the slides to you for both this presentation and the other presentation that will follow. I just want to make one point that I think is important. All of the development that will occur within both of the annexation areas will require subdivision platting. It will require some form of either a standard plat or a planned area development plat, and all of those things will come before you. Those are the primary opportunities to look at lot layouts, plan for buffer areas, to take into account roadway alignments. So there's an opportunity, multiple opportunities in the future to accomplish some of what's proposed by the presenter that you just saw.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to also point out that as a function of the city providing municipal water, all development that gets city water is required to follow essentially ADWR when it comes to plant palette. So there are no non-native plants. It's all low water type plants. So that's a mandate similar to what George is talking about sort of later on, that, you know, you're not going to see palm trees and things like that, obviously, or high water type plants. It's all low water type plants that are natural to the area as a function or as a condition of getting city water.
Mr. Chairman, did you have a question before we start the next? I apologize for the last one.
My question was, with this potential annexation, is there going to be any county islands within the city limits then?
No, sir. We actually are prohibited by state law from allowing or creating a county island.
Okay.
Now, that can be accomplished in a number of ways. You can have a strip of property in the county 10 feet wide that creates an umbilical that prevents a county island. And we do have a situation like that already existing north of here, not part of this annexation, that sort of follows that pattern. So we do have some concerns. We have looked thoroughly at the legal descriptions. We will not create any county islands by the annexations, either north or south.
Thank you.
We do have another presentation that I believe we have the presenter online, Mr. Anderson. So Tammy, if you're listening, Mr. Anderson should be up to speak next, please.
Yes, Walt, you're unmuted. You're unmuted.
Thank you very much. This is Walt Anderson. I live at 2911 East Granite Gardens Drive in Prescott. And I've been a resident of this area for 30 years and have been involved in many community issues, especially relating to conservation. And I've given you a background sheet that you can see all the details of of the context. Well, this has been a wonderful collaborative process that's been unprecedented in Prescott's history in terms of citizen engagement. From the beginning, Save the Dells has sought a win-win-win solution to the challenges of planning a major development while protecting the most scenic and ecologically important landscape in the area, which you all recognize, the Granite Dells. The resulting plan serves our community and the developer while preserving a vital part of the Dells for both people and wildlife. So I would consider this a signature victory for Prescott. Now we have to fine tune it so it reaches its best potential. And I just want to focus on one part of the proposal that I think needs some careful attention. Next slide, please. The final map submitted by AED shows a few deviations from the open space boundaries that we proposed, the Save the Dells proposed. While the proposed natural open space acreage of 474 acres seems close to the 500 acres proposed by Save the Dells, the changes can have some significant impacts, which I will discuss. The changes include adding 2 small parcels west of Granite Creek, those 2 that you see there that are to remain in the county, and the extension north of a rocky thumb of unbuildable Dells Rock that was not in the original proposal, and the displacement of our line south on section H, such that the grassy ridge with Native American archaeological sites would no longer be protected. Next slide, please. The spectacular view from the Peavine Trail would be marred if houses were placed on the grassy ridge where the Native American ruins are up in the upper right. It would also encroach on the valley, which is important wildlife habitat, and increase the likelihood of damaging erosion from the hardscape of development instead of the natural sponge of the grasslands. Next slide, please. If you look at an aerial view, you can imagine that the AED planners looked at an aerial photo and simply thought that the grassy area would be easy to build upon without considering the steep slope there and the existence of the archaeological site. It's important to have on-the-ground knowledge of the landscape, and I'll come back to this slide later. Next slide, please. We strongly desire an adjustment of the open space boundary in the southwest part of H on your map to the north to protect both the view and the archaeological site, as our original Save the Dells boundary would have done. The open space values here are much higher than in the small parcel framed by 89 and old 89A that remains in the county. Moreover, moving the boundary north would enable this area to accommodate an interpretive center, much wanted by members of the public and of the City Council. Next slide, please. The Highlands Center for Natural History has expressed a willingness to locate a visitor center here. This would be an incredible asset to the community and would increase the economic returns to the city through high quality education and recreation. It would be a logical launch point for trails into the newly protected open space and the Peavine and Iron King trails. So it's essential in our planning to take this need into account and zone for it, because once zoning implies houses, it becomes much harder to correct it. So we want to do it right from the start. The interpretive center needs to be close to a major highway, but not so close that the visitor experience is diminished. It should have a view of the interior of the Dells, including the Point of Rocks, and ready access into both rocky terrain and the beautiful valley that is the centerpiece of our newly designated open space. It turns out that protecting the grassy ridge with the archaeological site fits right in with the vision of the interpretive center being located here. I'm proposing this. If the old 89A bridge could be upgraded to support traffic, then access across that bridge and along the old 89A roadway next to the Rocky Thumb would make sense. Then a cutoff road around the top of the thumb and back down close to the archaeological site would provide the needed access to the center. It would have views of the interior and have a short handicap accessible paths for a Rocky Dells experience that's very different from that already available at our lakes. Parking could be designed close to the rocks before the center. Suitable walls or fencing to separate the housing complex from the center should be designed, but the residents of the AED development would have easy access to this cultural treasure. So you can see here, suggest moving the boundary for the housing just a little bit to the north to accommodate that potential visitor center. Next slide. We all recognize that riparian or creekside areas are vitally important for wildlife and for watershed values. Saving the valley of No Name Creek by designating that as natural open space was smart planning. However, the general proposal to have fairly high density housing in Area G lacks specific on-site development, but you can see it comes right up to Granite Creek. And it's important to protect that riparian area with a sufficient buffer zone. The creek can't become the informal backyard of the houses, so a suitable wall to enclose the development will be necessary there. The city will engage a planning firm to help design details, such as the site for the interpretive center, locations of trails, etc. And they've indicated there will be opportunities for public input to the plans. I commend this intention for collaboration, and let's have a thorough and transparent planning process. Next slide. So I want to close with a strong reminder for the city to adhere very closely to its general plan and open space master plan. We have a unique opportunity to be a model of good planning for the state, and the quality of life in the Prescott area is at stake. Next slide, please. We're very excited that the community will gain superb land that will be a vital part of our dream for a greater Granite Dells Park and Preserve. And we're grateful to all who have participated. Let's do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. George, do we?
So I'm just asking if you have any questions for Mr. Anderson.
Are there any questions? We have another presenter from Save the Dells.
I believe we do. Tammy, if you can let Ms. Burr.
Yeah, we have Paula Butcher. You unmute yourself. Paula?
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Paula Burr, 7299 East Mingus Trail in Prescott Valley. Chairman Michaelman, I have provided to Bryn the slides that you've seen in the past two presentations, as well as my write-up and the one you'll be hearing next, which I'm sure that she'll be able to get to you for further review. So I'd like to talk to you about some of the proposed zoning for the Southern Annexation. And the first one I'd like to talk about is the multifamily zoning. We agree with the city that the northern part of that South Annexation, especially sections A and C, are appropriate areas for the multifamily zoning. We do have concerns about all of Section B receiving this designation, however, because of its proximity to the Peavine Trail on its eastern border. By design, multifamily zoning allows for obviously much higher density of people and cars, and also often results in multi-story structures. And this type of development right up alongside the Peavine Trail could severely impact the trail experience. We're concerned that both residents and tourists' enjoyment of the trail could be diminished by apartments looming over the trail, as well as by the increased noise from parking lots and higher density living. If multifamily is allowed in the eastern half of Section B, we think it would be appropriate to require a larger buffer between the multifamily development and the trail than might be required between a single family home and the trail. This application also has much more multifamily zoning than we've seen in previous proposals from AED or than was discussed during negotiations. And I understand the applicant's desire for maximum flexibility, and we're fine with that. But we also need to ensure that the agreed upon 850 living units for the southern section is adhered to. So each unit in a multifamily development must be counted as an individual living unit and not as a collective, which means that a duplex must be counted as 2 living units and not 1, just because the units happen to be joined together into one structure. Another concern that we have is with the proposed zoning for parcels K and L. AED's proposal identifies these parcels as anticipated to be an eco-friendly resort anchored by a core building or base camp consisting of up to 200 rooms. And the letter of intent between the city and AED lists several possible development options for the resort as a hotel, a condotel, vacation rental, or timeshare. So in other words, there's really no clear vision for exactly what this resort will entail. Much less any assurance from the applicant that it will even be built. And as you could see from Joe Bain's wonderful slideshow, K&L are a very prominent part of the Dells experience from the trails. AED is requesting that parcels K and L be zoned as a special plan community, which does not include a hotel or a motel as a conditional use or a permitted use according to the Land Development Code, but it does, according to the city, accommodate a mix of residential and commercial uses. And the LOI clearly intends for two possible uses of this land, either a resort or that it be open space. And I was involved in the negotiations between Save the Dells, the city, and AED, and this is one area where the city and Save the Dells were always in agreement that K&L should be developed as a low-impact resort or nothing. So absent any detailed plans from AED describing its resort, not to mention the broad assortment of potential development choices listed in the LOI, how are you really able to determine the appropriate resort zoning? And what's to prevent AED from doing what many developers have done in the past, which is to drop the commercial component of an approved plan and replace it with just more additional residential because their zoning allowed it. To meet the objective of the LOI and prevent unintended consequences, we think the most appropriate zoning for parcels K and L at this time is natural open space, with a development agreement provision that states that these parcels may be rezoned to accommodate a resort if and when AED submits actionable plans for resort development. It seems much more prudent to assign the zoning of open space, which we know is an intended use, rather than assigning a zoning that may not even fit with the eventual resort plan submitted by AED, or worse yet, grant zoning rights which were never intended and actually contradict the expectation and objective of the letter of intent. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and for all of the Save the Dells people to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the presenter?
Mr. Chairman, I can comment on that if
Yes.
okay. Just to clarify, the commission and ultimately the council, when it comes to adopting zoning, we're not allowed to adopt zoning and then as a condition of zoning, limit the uses within that zoning category. So if this were a straight up zoning, let's say business commercial for K and L, for instance, all of those uses that are listed as allowable in business commercial and in all lesser zonings, including residential, would be allowed. City can't, in its zoning category or designation, do that. So it is correct that the LOI indicates that parcels K and L are intended to be used for a resort. That LOI is going to be transformed or converted into a development agreement. And that's where the city and the developer agree to limit the use of K&L to a resort. So the zoning you adopt for it is sort of a global type designation. And then the reduction or restriction of the types of uses are done by way of the development agreement. And the development agreement doesn't sort of formally come to the commission. We could talk about it a little bit, and it's still being drafted and worked on. But when the council then addresses this issue, the annexations, the rezonings, and all the other approvals, it also addresses the development agreement. So we can't contract zone. We can't agree in a development agreement to designate K&L as natural open space and then later on rezone it, because a rezoning is legislative and you can't contract to legislate. So we do it the other way. We give it its appropriate general zoning designation, in this case proposes SPC, and then in the agreement we agree with the developers to precisely what development is allowed on there, and in this case it would be a 200-room resort. From a global standpoint, what the city doesn't want on K&L is nothing. The city wants a resort that's going to generate sales tax and bed tax and those kinds of things. That's benefit there. So there are sort of broader benefits from having a resort up there, not the least of which is bed tax could be dedicated to maintenance and operation of the natural open space. So it doesn't, because there's going to be obviously a lot of work, as somebody mentioned, the stock ponds, for instance, those kinds of things, a bed tax can help offset the cost of. Also, just to clarify, the LOI indicates 800 residential units. I think Paula mentioned 850. It's 800 residential units on A through H. And each residential unit, so an apartment, a condo, or a duplex or what have you unit, each unit is a residential unit. So 800 is 800 single family or a combination of single family and multifamily, but each unit is a unit. And so just to assuage any concerns, 800 residential units is 800 residential units.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one further clarification, maybe a little more helpful for you to keep in mind in the future. The SPC zoning district is specially planned communities. It requires a separate master plan that requires a review by the Planning Commission and requires adopting by the council. So SPC designation doesn't give development rights without this additional step, even beyond what the city attorney pointed out to you. So there's still an additional review process. You'll see it, it will be public, and we will see more details at that time.
Okay.
I believe we have,
Now we have Ralph Hess. If you unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to appear by Zoom. My comments follow on Paula's pretty closely. She said that she had submitted a synopsis of what I was going to address, and I've modified that a little bit from based on what I've heard from staff this morning. But it pretty much is the same as you have before you. Staff is recommending the applicant's requested special plan community zoning as appropriate for the rezoning of the resort parcels K and L. If you accept staff's recommendation, despite the questions raised by Paula Burr and the Land Development Code restrictions, then the Land Development Code requires that in establishing an SPC district, the city council shall require a master plan of the development. In fact, you heard Mr. Worley just discuss that. Mr. Worley has identified this required master plan as a submaster plan that you will likely consider later. Yet, the code requires that the plan in the establishment of the SPC district. So that leads me to the questions. If you are inclined to accept the staff's recommendation to approve SPC zoning for parcels K and L, do you plan to be reviewing and taking public comment on an SPC master plan that's required in establishing the district prior to rendering your decision? I think this is even more important, hearing what Mr. Palladini commented about the fact that you're limited once you establish what the code, what the zoning is going to be as to what uses can be included in within that district. And so if you are not inclined to look at a plan prior to making your determination whether SPC zoning is appropriate, absent that SPC submaster plan, how can you consider whether the SP zoning is appropriate for parcels K and L? And Mr. Palladini also made reference to the fact that AED and the city have initiated pre-annexation development agreement negotiations, which will likely include agreements regarding those uses. And regarding the development agreement, pursuant to state statute, a development agreement includes the conditions, terms, restrictions, and requirements for annexation of property by the municipality. And the Prescott City Code states, in part, that the duties of the Planning and Zoning Commission, you commissioners, shall include reviewing, considering, and recommending to the City Council approval or denial of proposed annexations into the city. Therefore, my question is, to fulfill your duty to make a recommendation to the City Council regarding the proposed annexation, when do you expect to review and take public comment on the development agreements, conditions, terms, and restrictions and requirements for annexation in the course of your Planning and Zoning Commission meetings? Now, I just heard from Mr. Palladini that it's not expected that the development agreement will be presented to you. Yet, how will you be able to fulfill your duties to recommend to the council regarding the annexation if the terms and conditions of the annexation are going to be set forth in that development agreement? So thank you very much for listening to all of us and allowing us to appear electronically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Any questions of Ralph? George, you want to make a comment?
Just a comment. I believe we have some additional folks who want to comment. Right. We have in-person comment cards that we would like to take first and then pick up those Zoom comments following that, if that's okay with you.
Allow time, Mr. Giese, too. Okay.
Okay, so I have 3 comment cards from public present right now. I have a 4th, which I believe he would like me to read. So we'll start with the 3 here in person. You will have 3 minutes total, and I'll let you know at the 30-second mark. And then I will let you know when your time is up. So first speaker, Parker Northrup. Hi, Parker. If you could state your address at the podium.
Sure. My name is Parker Northrup. I live at 1381 Nature's Way here in Prescott. I'm also on your airport advisory committee at the airport, and I'm also the chair of the flight department at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where I'm responsible for the flight operations of our 700 flight students. Thank you for letting me comment, Commission, on the thing. What I'm here today is basically to talk to you about or emphasizing how important it is that you take the airport-specific area plan into consideration as you take your actions today. That plan involves a lot of considerations for us for safety, and it's something that we take as critical at Embry-Riddle. And so the things that we've noticed and we want to emphasize, besides just the land use itself, is the noise concerns. I can't do anything about airplanes. They're going to make noise. So it helps us be good neighbors. It helps your citizens in the city stay on track with its development if we consider the noise concerns as outlined in the ASAP as you go forward. So I just wanted to make those comments for you, and I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you,
sir.
Okay. So the next speaker we have is Cindy Gresser. Hi, Cindy.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Cindy Gresser. I am the Executive Director at the Museum of Indigenous People, address 147 North Arizona Avenue. I'd like to thank Walt Anderson for his presentation. I am here today to simply bring to your attention that, yes, in Parcel H, that thumb that is sticking out contains very significant archaeological ruins that have been identified since the 1990s as site number N. Hold on, I'm getting to my curator's email. You don't care. It's N381. What has been identified on this site or at this site are pit house ruins and at least one 2-room, approximately, Pueblo structure with surface findings that indicate human remains. And so while mitigation is one of the processes to solve these problems, our area is so rich in history. I am asking you as commissioners to please consider moving some of the open space boundaries to encompass approximately a 10 to 23 acre area, which would permanently preserve this site, and if the Highlands Center or another agency in the future chooses to build an interpretive center there, that respect is given to those ruins, as some people call them, because that was a place where people lived and dwelled for thousands and thousands of years. We are seeking partners to come in to interpret what is there for you more specifically. However, I believe this is an opportunity for the city to protect a place much like they did with the pit house ruins at Watson Lake, like the town of Prescott Valley has for Fitzmaurice Ruin, and to tell just another very, very important story in our local area about our Native people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Stan Goligoski. I do have a question. So the thumb I've heard it referred to as the thumb between G and H, parcels G and H on the natural open space, and then the thumb on H itself. Are we talking about a ruin that is in the thumb of the open space or actually on H? I just want a point of clarification.
It's on H.
Thank you.
That little thumb that sticks out on H.
Okay. All right, next speaker, Daryl Ostermiller.
Commissioners, staff, and council, my name is Daryl Ostermiller. I live at 13850 North Spanish Barb Lane. I am the AOPA representative for Prescott Airport. AOPA stands for Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. It's a national organization, mostly works in Washington and provides us with resources for general aviation. And also business aircraft. I'm also the president of Prescott Airport Users Association. We basically work with airport management to go back and forth and keep lines of communication open between all kinds of aviation on the airport. Mostly, we are concerned with the smaller and lower part of the airport. In other words, individuals that have airplanes and very small aircraft. We have approximately 300 general aviation private owners on the airport, and we basically are the smallest entity, not doing anything commercial, strictly private aircraft. And here again, my job is to communicate with Director Sabota, and she stole a lot of my thunder and covered most of the things I was going to talk about. I'm also appointed by the mayor on the Airport Advisory Committee, and that keeps me in tune with all areas of the airport. Aviation's been my whole life. I was in the Air Force first, right out of college, Air Force, and then with Southwest Airlines. One thing I want to I started with Southwest Airlines very early on. And one thing I want to bring up also is I've heard comments occasionally that, bigger airlines will be coming to the airport. And I can guarantee you somebody like Southwest will not be entertaining coming in here if people are concerned about the noise. But the noise issue is what I want to address here. We support this development. It's a win-win for everybody. The noise idea, though, these houses that are in close proximity to the airport, eventually these owners will be the ones that try to close down the airport. I have a specific recommendation in addition to what's already been pointed out, and that is
You have
to
30 seconds.
have a notification to these owners buying these homes at the point of sale as well as at closing. I think most people recognize at closing the paperwork goes fast and furious, and I'm not sure these people recognize it. If we could also require a point of sale recognition of the airport noise area at point of sale, I think it'd be a tremendous asset. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I have one other. I don't believe he's here. Is there Jason Kopsik here? Okay, so he submitted a form. I will read it. He is the president of North Air Aviation. And this reads, North Air Aviation is the oldest tenant and flight school at the Prescott Airport and takes pride in our airport and our community. Throughout the years operating at the Prescott Airport, we have seen a very stark change in the community view of the airport and aircraft operations, that somehow the airport and its operations are detrimental to the community. Most of these views are based on misconceptions and issues with aircraft noise. The amount of building that has taken place around the airport in the last 20 years has placed a large amount of homes in places that are directly underneath the flight path for airport operations, which then leads to noise complaints and unfortunately anger towards the airport and its tenants. The continued residential buildup around the airport is only going to increase these issues, and it falls upon all of us to develop the areas around the airport responsibly. If a responsible, thought-out approach is not taken, we will end up with a scenario similar to the Santa Monica Airport, which is being forced to close. Airport tenants have heard some residents claim that they will do what was done to Santa Monica here in Prescott. If the town council would use the ASAP map that has been drawn up as a guide to development, that would greatly increase the chance of allowing the airport to continue its normal operations and the benefits it provides the entire area, with a minimum of negative interaction with the public. Along with adopting the ASAP as a required document for future development, we also feel that it must be stated that we cannot accept major changes to the operation of the airport without causing dire repercussions to the airport operators. An example of this would be closing of the crosswind runway. If that runway were to be removed from operation, it would greatly impact the flight school's operations at an airport that has notoriously changing winds and would actually risk pilot safety. Okay.
Thank you. I think Tammy can tell us if we have anyone via Zoom who would also like to speak.
Yes, we have Barbara Jacobson. If you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Commission, I really listened with intent this day to the presentation that was given. I have a few points. You can answer these questions now, or I'd like to have them go to particularly George Worley and Joe Baines for future clarification. I'm curious as to why those two little parts off to the west side might remain in the county. I know Save the Dells alluded to those as well, but I really didn't hear in the presentation an explanation on why it was great for those to remain in the county. Just a question. I'm a little confused about the connectivity. It comes in from the north. I think more is going to be added later, and I would not like that left out at this point if there's additional roads going to be appearing. I also heard one commissioner state that the crossing of the Peavine should not be at grade. I heard that clearly stated, that it should be above or below. And then Joe Bain said, well, it might be at grade. So I'm listening to that acutely and not happy with that might be at grade at all. And I know he mentioned a 40-foot drop. I don't see a delivery truck getting under that. Below grade would obviously be the most advantageous to not ruin the historical value of the Peavine Trail as well. But that's an area that I'd love further explanation on. And mainly, particularly after hearing Walt Anderson speak about a potential park interpretive center. I know we talk about a regional park kind of thing. Joe mentioned park a number of times and shows slides of a treed area where the park was. I'm not clear exactly where that is. I'm assuming it's part of the open space, but it's off by the Pinyon Pines area there. It's confusing to me what he means by park. I mean, are we talking splash pads, swing sets, you know, what and how much acreage would that encompass? I would like Joe's version of a park within, I'm assuming, part of this open space further explained so we know what we're buying into. Thank you so much. I'll be listening for those in future meetings for clarification on those things, unless somebody can answer something now. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
We'll gather answers and have those available to you.
Okay. Do we have other?
Yeah, we have another one. They have Zoom as their name. If you unmute yourself. The person who has Zoom on their name, you're allowed to speak.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi there. Yes, my name is Charles Betts. I live at 5359 Crescent Edge in Prescott, and I'm in Mandalay Foothills. I'm a recent person who moved in here, and my only real big question is with these new zone areas that have over 50,000 homes that are going to be put in there. Since I've been here, I understand that there's a big water issue. Has that all been studied enough to where we're going to have enough water for the 50,000 that are approved now and probably another 100,000 that are going to come in?
Well, sir, unfortunately, that is not a purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Water is not an item that we take into our consideration. But I can understand your thoughts and concerns about it.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, in any annexation, water is part of the discussion. It's thoroughly vetted and it's thoroughly approved before the city council can approve an annexation. We don't want to bring property in with promises to allow development and not be able to accommodate that development with the resources and infrastructure that's necessary. So that will, or has been, addressed, and I think will probably be more clearly addressed in the future development agreement that will accompany the annexations to the city council.
Don Tom here. I'm confused about that, this water topic. We're being asked to approve a not a general plan, a master plan for the North and South annexation. Okay, and according to Prop 400, which is all about safe yield or safe, sustainable yield, and because of this safe yield quest, we're asked to add steps to the annexation process to make it more deliberate. So item number 2, which asks us to approve the master plan of AED South, implicit in that is that in fact we have addressed safe yield. We have enough water, as this last speaker just pointed out. So in my mind, this really is the elephant that's in the room.
John, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. The water issue does get addressed at the city council. It does get addressed at the by way of the water service agreement, pre-annexation development agreement. The commission's function here is to, by the way, not approve. It's to make a recommendation to the council who will either approve or not approve. So yours is a recommending body, primarily as to land uses. Are these appropriate land uses given given the access, given the topography, given the density and those kinds of things? So your analysis when it comes to the annexation and proposed land use is just that. It would, as George mentioned earlier, later on, you will also get a bite at the apple when it comes to subdivision platting. So then you get to address things like street widths and, private open space and those kinds of things. So there's a process that this goes through. And I understand, I guess, some of the, I don't know if it's frustration, but I understand the question of why can't we address it all right now? And this is not how the process works. It's a step by step. So you're looking at this. This is a 30,000 foot kind of view of this proposal. And then you get to winnow it down when you get into the various subdivision platting as to where streets go, and then that's when your public works department comes in and talks about utilities and those kinds of things, and then your community development department gets to talk about buffer zones between housing and the trail, about internal open space and maybe, public or private parks that are in the private land development. So you're sort of looking at this big picture at this point in time. And then next time you meet, you'll talk about the north parcel, which will also talk about things like, are these appropriate uses, not just under the zoning, and here a little bit, but under the ASAP? Are these compatible uses with airport, as you've heard a couple people mention? So you're looking at these as, are these appropriate uses, compatible uses with surrounding areas, surrounding uses, and you'll also eventually look at things like traffic and access and those kinds of things. But water is an area that Prescott addresses through its council water subcommittee, and then ultimately the council by way, in this case, primarily by way of the pre-annexation development agreement, and then subsequent water service type agreements.
John, Tom here. I'm confused. Prop 400 clearly specifies this body as having some equity in the water issue.
With all due respect, it does not. What Prop 400?
Let me finish. It's included twice in this deck. I read it twice. 2 pages that speak to the city charter of Prop 400. And if you want to read it, it says again that these extra incremental steps Prop 400 specifies is that the Planning and Zoning Commission, approves a master plan. So what's in the master plan?
Master plan is primarily, in your case, the land uses, the appropriate land uses for a proposed annexation property. When Prop 400 or when the charter provision that deals with expansion of lands beyond 250 acres, what it talks about when it comes to water resources is that the water and the effluent, that the effluent is dedicated to permanent recharge. That's where that charter provision comes in, dealing with I don't want to call it safe yield, because Prescott can have an impact on safe yield, but Prescott can't do safe yield. The safe yield is an AMA-wide issue. It's not a city of Prescott. We can impact it, we can't control it. So things like safe yield and those things, that takes the whole AMA, which involves Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, and the county and all those things. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, to sort of maybe alleviate concerns about water, all new development to get water must follow Prescott's conditions or policies when it comes to things like landscaping, things like low-use water fixtures, those kinds of things. And our current I guess, track record when it comes to new development is that 90% of the water that goes out to new homes comes back as effluent. And that 90% is then recharged into the aquifer. So we have a great track record. Now, overall, the city's percentage is lower because we have much more. But so following things like landscaping requirements, following things like plant pallets and those things, that, reducing outdoor water use, making sure that there's sewer and not septic tanks, all those things are what helps that number, helps us achieve that 90% number in terms of return. So, the charter does talk about things like returning effluent into permanent recharge and not using effluent as credits for future development. But at this point, at this time, it's outside of the Planning Commission's purview to consider the water and sewer issue in its recommendation to the council.
Thank you. I know, because I'm married to an attorney, not to argue with you. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else?
Yes, we have Paula. Oh. Hold on 1 second. Where'd she go? I'm not sure what happened to Paula. Oh, wait, there she is. Okay, Paula, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I just want to make a comment in reference to what Mr. Palladini said about my comment with the zoning, and actually what he was speaking about with the limitations and restrictions of development agreement is exactly why parcels K and L need to be protected by zoning until we know exactly what is planned for that area. Development agreements come and go, they can be amended, they expire, but zoning remains a right until the applicant requests it be changed, which is exactly what AED could do when they have plans for their resort. If we grant them zoning that may or may not conform to what the LOI intends, I think that there could be a lot of unintended consequences from that. It's very specific in the negotiations that that be a resort or nothing. So until we know exactly what that resort looks like and whether it actually intends to be built and to the financial benefit of the city, it is prudent for the city to keep that as open space. Otherwise, we basically lose control over what goes up there. And Mr. Palladini spoke to that pretty clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And we have no more people with their hands raised. And just as another note, we have 32 minutes left.
Okay. I gather we have no more from the public here that want to speak. Mr. Giese, would you like to talk to us?
Got to get rid of my gum so my mom doesn't get mad. Although I don't think she's watching. I'm Jason Giese, my office at 923 East Gurley Suite 203. I don't have a presentation per se for you guys. What I would like to do to start, though, is commend the staff. So I've been doing this for approximately 23 years in the city of Prescott. I handled the rezone and annexation of the Dells project for Mr. Fan in 2007. Have lots of experience with Prop 400 and actions like this. The staff has done a wonderful job, best job I've ever seen by far, of compiling the data. This project is complicated. They've compiled it in a way that is understandable. It reads well, it's easy to follow. And I'd just like to say thank you That helps tremendously, because a lot of times when we're dealing with complex real estate matters like this, we get a lot of folks that, it's not that they aren't smart folks, they're ignorant to the way the process works, how the city works, and the efforts of the staff have really helped, in my opinion. I can kind of speak to different things individually. What always helps me is your guys' questions, what you see as important, and I'm happy I can talk about real estate for the next 24 hours and never take a drink. I enjoy what I do for a living. The one thing I would like to point out in the drone footage video, the proposed trail crossing site that is shown is the original site that we proposed. That was significant because it allowed for a grade separated crossing of the Peavine Trail where we could take cars underneath the trail and allow the pedestrians over the top. The problem with that is, as the negotiations have played out over the last 2+ years, that location is in essence the north side of No Name Creek. That's what creates, the drainage creates the topographic relief to get under the trail. So if that were the location, which it is not the location proposed on your map, we would have to run a road into the natural open space area, the Point of Rocks Preserve. We're obviously open to that. I won't lead that charge. Someone else can take those arrows for me. I've been there. So that's really the only clarification that I could see in the presentation. As it relates to our strategy, I think I've said this clearly a lot, but just in case. This is a massive piece of business. It's very important to the city of Prescott for many different reasons, from the Point of Rocks Preserve to the extension of the runway. We support the airport, we support base jobs, we support economic growth in the area. What I am trying to accomplish, which started in 2015 when I amended the general plan, is to secure the annexation and the zoning to bring the projects to life. This is basically 2,500 acres of land. You're talking about millions of dollars to take it to the next level, if you will, and just simply get to, well, it's not simple, but folks, I think, don't understand. To get to a preliminary plat, the first phase of the first subdivision, north, south, and in the commercial in between on our lands that are already in the city of Prescott, is millions of dollars of planning. So what we're attempting to do is secure the right to development so that we can then go spend that money with confidence moving forward. Should we not be able to annex the property into the city of Prescott, obviously our strategy would change. And so I just want to make that clear to anyone, and I'm happy to answer any questions along those lines. How can I answer your questions? What would you like to hear from me?
Commission members?
Yeah, I've got one question. Mr. Giese, so a couple of public comments have come forward about the parcel H.
Yes.
And the Indian ruins that I don't know the exact location. I know it's in the Thumb area. And then we've also talked about a visitor center and a parking lot in there.
Yes.
Is there any type of consideration that's for that Thumb where you have it listed as small lots? Is there any consideration that you've kind of played with there to kind of work with the public on that piece? And if so, and I have to ask George too, what would that be zoned as? I mean, I don't think it would be national open space, but what would it look like?
So, George, if you could give me an exhibit that shows the other 11 acres that's not included in the annexation, that is part of the overall deal. There we go. Thank you very much. So, Stan, the 11 acres, the two parcels to the west of the annexation area, I think everybody here is familiar with that today. I'm gonna guess, I have it in my notes that we'll dig it up, at the point that we add the acreage to the offer is somewhere in the 12 to 24 month range. That's been part of our map for a long time now. And so when we start talking about a visitor center, I'm gonna tackle that one first. What our vision was, because we originally started with a park that would utilize our water right, our surface water right, so that we could create a lake create recreation that would be, in essence, in and out off of the creek, no different than really the way Watson Lake operates presently, so that you could double up on the use of the water right, use it for recreation in a park setting, run it back into the creek, and also use it for recharge when the weather allows us to do that. So I call it the Half Moon piece, but it's directly across from the old bridge. Thanks, George. You gonna point out it for me? Perfect. So that piece lends itself, it sits between the old bridge. I don't actually know the name of the road. I'm going to call it Pinion Pines Drive, or yeah, Pinion Pines is the bar, right? So that piece of land lends itself to be flattened, frankly, and create a parking lot that's off-site so that you can utilize the old bridge for pedestrian access. Why would you use it for pedestrian access? So I'll blame it on fan contracting because that's actually what happened. Back in the day when we all drove to Prescott Valley via 89A in that location, one of Fan's guys unfortunately had a dozer on a lowboy. He took out one side of the bridge. The bridge actually structurally, the integrity is there to use it as a vehicular access today. But the reality of it is it's undersized, it's old. It's a wonderful pedestrian access that would cost hopefully no money, because I think that the county probably for $5 will take the liability of that bridge and let the city of Prescott have it. So you can create a parking lot and access into natural open space. And then as it relates to the interpretive center, what I see going on is there's a bit of a game of football. Whose land does the visitor center go on? Ours, we give up more land, or the city's? So with approximately 475 acres in the kitty, which is unprecedented in this town, there's never been a deal like this. Huge win-win for all parties. I'm going to tell you, I'm selfish. So we have about 275 net acres left on the map above. So the majority of the land's going to the city's trust. We support that. Our skin is in the game. We feel we've done the right thing. As a resident of Prescott since 1996, the moral obligation that I've felt to do the right thing is satisfied by simply getting to the LOI. The deal's on the table. So we'll find out how we proceed into the details from there, because the beating heart of the deal and what is valuable to all of us is clearly there's agreement. Now we got to clean up the details. So I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, we've set this up on purpose to solve for parking lot off-site, a bridge that exists and gets reutilized, which creates no big expense for anyone. And then the city is free to plan their park and what I would say interpretive center that goes along with it as they see fit. We've provided plenty of land for that. The Indian ruins, next piece. Number one, ruins are common in the state of Arizona. They're common on public land, they're common on private land. They get dealt with in various ways over the course of time. At the point that we start doing the master engineering, assuming success in an annexation, the first thing we're obviously going to order is the archaeological study. I don't do that. A certified engineer in that field of study is hired. It's put together. The Land Development Code requires that of me. It's not optional. Based on the findings of that report, we then have to follow City of Prescott Land Development Code, Arizona state law, and potentially federal law. We have some flexibility as to whether we could mitigate those ruins. It's very costly, very expensive, or very time consuming. We could leave them alone. At a future date, we could donate land back to the city if what we found was something that we went, we just really don't want a part of this. We don't know what is actually there. We'll hire it done by professionals, find it out, and take the next steps when it's appropriate to do so. From my very first public meeting, which was not required under any land development code or Prop 400 or anything else, the ruins are open and notorious. People have been there legally. People have been there trespassing. Frankly, I'm a Northern Arizona kid who spends a lot of time outdoors. I think that a portion of those ruins have been dug previously. I've run people off of our property on purpose with shovels when I came around the corner. Who knows? And so I am sensitive to the ruins. We will follow the code, state law, and federal law at the point that we get there. At this point, are we willing to add another? I've heard numbers from 10, I think, to 24 acres today off the top of my head. The answer would be no.
In relation to your question on zoning, however, if in the process of subdividing property in that area, a typical process for small lots like the SF6 district that Mr. Giese is proposing here would be to do a planned area development that requires private open space. You see that a lot in subdivisions. Prescott Lakes is full of private open space areas. Prescott Lakes also is an example of preserving, in their case, more of rock art type of things than actual ruins, through a process of setting them aside as part of a required open space within the subdivision itself. So there are a number of levels where additional protections could be had. Mr. Giese is absolutely right on the layers of control that are necessary. The city of Prescott has an archaeological requirement in our land development code prior to the preliminary plat being done, and we have staff on board who are qualified and able to review and interpret those things. So that is something that has to be addressed and will be addressed.
Appreciate all the clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions at this time? Thank you, Jason. I imagine we'll be talking to you more.
Thank you.
At this time, we're 20 minutes to 12. I would like to suggest we continue this meeting until our next scheduled Planning and Zoning Commission. Give us all a chance to digest everything we've heard here and see what other additional information we need to have. So I don't think we adjourn the meeting. What do we do? Continue it?
I would just suggest go ahead and adjourn the meeting. The next meeting will be properly agendized in the same manner today's was. So you can go ahead and adjourn. Don't, because we're not meeting tomorrow morning, we're meeting in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
So it'll just be properly agendized as a new meeting that will be basically continuing this same big topic.
Okay. Any staff
Chairman,
updates?
we can set aside a short portion of that meeting to talk about AED South again, and then provide you a similar presentation for the North Annexation.
I think that'd be good. It gives us a chance to look at what we've learned so far, what additional questions we may have and so forth. So we'll set the first part of the meeting up for being the South. Anybody listening, I think we can still take comments at that time too concerning the South on that part. So it's not a done deal for public input on that. So any staff updates?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. This has been a really informative meeting. Like you said, there's a lot to digest. I just wanted to make a reminder to the public participants that we will continue to gather any comments that come into us via email. We have a standard email address for our planning team, planning@prescott-az.gov. And all of the AED project materials, the complete history of this project from the original application are found on our website. There is a tile on the main landing page that says AED, has a picture of the Dells. Click on that and any member of the public will be dropped into a complete chronological history of this application and all the processes that have been attached to it. So we would just encourage any public comment that would like to be submitted prior to the next meeting. We are totally open to that. We provide those comments in writing to the commission, and also those folks are welcome to come in via Zoom or in-person attendance at the next meeting on September 10th as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Meeting is adjourned.